and welcome to Loaves to Legends, the new favourite history podcast brought to you by Sandwich Guildhall Museum. I'm your host Gia, and I'm here with the rest of our lovely Loaves to Legends team to entertain and educate you in all things big and small related to our gorgeous town of Sandwich. Shortly I'll be joined by our second host, Kat, to give you today's episode. But before we do that, as this is our very first episode, we thought it was worth introducing who we are and what exactly Loaves to Legends is. So Loaves to Legends is a brand new podcast created by Sandwich Guildhall Museum. We are a museum situated in the small town of Sandwich in Kent, England. We share the stories of Sandwich, showcasing a small town with big history. In this podcast, you'll hear about the hidden stories, learn about the Loaves, us ordinary people, or the legends, as well as artifacts and criminal case files that are kept in our collection store. The histories that are not usually displayed within our relatively small museum. And this is exactly why we wanted to create this show. Whilst we are enormously proud of the incredible physical displays in our museum, we recognise that we simply do not have the space to show you, the public, all the wonders that we have in our collection. And this is why Millie, the museum's manager, and myself, Gia, a volunteer digital content creator, decided to create and produce Loaves to Legends. We have an episode to share with you every week for the next 10 weeks. There might also be a few added bonus episodes whenever we get too excited to wait until next season to share something. We have a great team behind this project, and you can get involved too. We hope to release a feedback episode with your thoughts and opinions on the subjects that we've spoken about. Also, each week, our guest hosts will pose a question about the subject that we're discussing, and we want to know what your answers are. We'll share those as part of our feedback episode too. Listen to the end to find out how to get your thoughts heard and to find out what the first question is. Today, I have the great pleasure to introduce you all to Kat. Kat is a folk musician with a degree from Cardiff University, which mainly focuses on music research. She's also a researcher, writer, and the host on this podcast. Hello, Kat.
Hello.
So for everyone listening, Kat here is the incredible genius that is playing the music that you hear for our podcast and the transition noises too. Now, Kat, I wanted to ask you, why this piece of music?
Well, we needed some medieval English music, really. And, I did some research. I had a look around. Unfortunately, we don't have much kind of violin or fiddle music from around that time because we wanted something that was quite upbeat.
Yes.
Unfortunately, very little written music has survived from that time, so I was a bit limited on options, to be honest. This is a brilliant piece. It's been preserved in the Bodleian Library, and Ian Pittaway has done a fantastic transcription because the notation was so old when it was written that it had to be kind of retranscribed for modern music. Ian Pittaway has done a brilliant interpretation, and that's what I'm playing here.
Amazing. Well, thank you for finding a piece that's so suitable for our podcast. You play it so beautifully as well.
Thank you very much.
And it really suits the musical instrument you were playing, the violin. It sounds gorgeous on that. But I believe there's something about the instruments you mentioned to me about this piece of music and the violin that you're using.
Right, yes. So actually the violin I'm playing it on is, of course, far too modern an instrument to be playing the tune. It would have been originally written for an instrument called a viol or possibly a viol, which is kind of the grandfather of the violin. It's a similar shape. It would have had the same strings on it, so it would have been tuned the same way. But it's kind of slightly flatter as an instrument. The strings would have been gut strings, so they'd have been made from cat guts or other animal guts.
Oh, wow.
On a violin, they're made of metal, so much more kind of animal friendly.
Definitely more vegan friendly, that.
Absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, so it would have been an older instrument that it was originally played on, so it would have been a slightly different sound. I'm doing my best to replicate the sound on a violin with my playing style and everything. But yeah, it would have been a much older instrument originally.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Is there anything else in this history of this instrument or this piece of music you wanted to share?
Well, there's an interesting debate going on academically about whether the piece is a dance or not.
Oh, do tell.
Okay, so if you listen to it, it kind of, maybe it's the speed I'm playing it, but it kind of feels like you want to move about to it. It's in the right kind of time to be a dance. But according to historical sources, I think we'll link the article that I've been reading because it's very interesting.
Yes, of course.
But there's lots of historical sources which show that there's no reference to people actually dancing to it. It seems like it was for people to sit and listen to while the musicians played it.
So less of a dance and more like a listening session that we'll have today, maybe.
A listening session, yes, exactly. More like a concert that you'd have today rather than a dance, which is very interesting because it sounds a lot like a dance.
It does. I feel like I want to get up and dance to that. So
exactly, yeah.
Maybe I'll start getting up and dancing every intro to the podcast.
Maybe that's the answer.
Thank you very much, Kat. That was absolutely wonderful. And everyone, you will be hearing Kat for the rest of this episode and future episodes. Is it true, Kat?
Absolutely.
There we are. Right. Thank you, Kat.
Thanks very much.
Oh, can you hear that? I think that sound means it's time for us to tell the listeners a tale. Hello, Kat.
Hello, Gia. I'm very excited for this.
I'm very excited. So I've gotten to love the character that we're going to be introduced to in this podcast. And I'm so excited for you, Kat, and for everyone else to discover who it is. Oh, spoiler. We have a character coming up, by the way.
Oh, okay. I'm very intrigued now.
So you're also a volunteer at the museum, aren't you?
I am.
So what do you do here at the museum?
I show people around when we have visitors. I show them around the museum. I tell them about the history of, the artifacts and the exhibits.
Brilliant. So Kat is very, very important to us here. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And as mentioned, she is featuring again later in the season. So hear out for Kat's voice at some point on her very own episode. Right. Kat and I have a very important question for everyone. How does a plague and an earthquake connect to one fairy item in our collection?
I'm sure most listeners can think of a creature that's connected to the plague, but they might be wondering, is there really a rat in the museum's collection?
Well, as you know, Kat, laying on the bottom shelf in the corner of our museum, a dried, partly shriveled up, but easily identifiable body of a rat is displayed with the label St. Peter's Church Rat. And this is the important question that many people ask. Why is there a rat in the museum? I'd like to introduce you all to the museum's unofficial mascot, Rodney the Rat. Give up for Rodney the Rat, everyone. I'd like to add here, this particular rat was frequently referred to as Rodney by a past volunteer. And while we do, of course, take our collection seriously, we thought Rodney would be the ideal character to lead us through our first episode. So before discussing the rat's story, we should first think about the time it was living in.
So, it's time to paint a picture. Imagine you are a peasant living in one of the many tightly compacted houses in Sandwich. You've just finished doing the disgusting daily task of chucking your human waste out of the window. Pigs and other livestock walk across the pebbled streets after the curfew bell has been rung, making a racket outside your window. It's cold, you've got barely any layers on, and certainly no form of heating, besides the fire that you've now had to put out thanks to the curfew bell. Chances are you're sick, or someone in your family is sick, and there's no modern chemist you can just pop to get your cold and flu tablets. The ordinary, day-to-day life as a peasant is bad, to say the least.
Before we go any further, I would like to discuss that curfew bell that you mentioned, because I find it's amazing. So for people at home and listeners, there's a curfew bell in Sandwich, and the history of it is that it used to be rung at 8 p.m. to let all the animals out onto the street so they can roam the streets. So if you look out your window in the evening, you'll see all the cattle and the pigs and all the chickens maybe. And it's like, there's almost like in COVID times, the animals being set free during the evenings. I love that. I love the idea. And also people had to put out the fires at 8 p.m. The curfew bell is actually still rung today in Sandwich as a tradition. And it used to be called the pig bell because of you let your pigs go loose. There also used to be a goose bell, but this was rung at 5 a.m. Now this was rung in Sandwich in modern day. However, it was stopped in the 20th century because the people of Sandwich were complaining too much as it was ringing way too early for everyone. So I reckon, the 8 p.m. bell is not too bad, but a 5 a.m. bell every day, really loud, I would hate that.
To add to that, the 5 a.m. goose bell was partly for everyone to get their animals back again, and the story goes that if they didn't, the animals were taken to an area of town and they had to pay a fine to get them back. I believe the area was called Hog's Corner. But enough about Sandwich's medieval traditions.
Yes, let's get back to medieval life as a whole. Times were tough.
Exactly. To summarise, you're poor, the streets stink of poo, your clothes are rags, and you're only going to live until your 40s if you're lucky. Then bam, 1568 hits, and the Black Death strikes Sandwich for 2 years. It goes away, and if you survived this, you would have been grateful and I'm sure rather relieved. But almost 30 years later, the Black Death makes another appearance in 1597, then again in 1635, again in 1643, and again in 1655 until 1658, which then brings us to the time of Rodney the Rat.
At the time, in the late 16th, 17th century England, you as a peasant, you had no clue about the medical causes, effects, and general ins and outs about this terrible disease, which you've heard through the talks around the town has been nicknamed the Great Sickness. If you walk through the streets, you would see red crosses painted on the doors to houses, signaling "Do not enter," because the inhabitants were infected. Sometimes you would see the words "Lord have mercy on us" on those doors too. Calls of "Bring out your dead" chimed throughout the street at night, as the infected corpses were collected into carts and dumped within plague pits. Having the Great Sickness would have been horrendous. Vomiting, fever, coughing up blood, and agonizing pain were all symptoms. And the worst, these painful, swollen, huge black lumps that appeared on your body.
As a side note here, many of us know the famous nursery rhyme Ring a Ring a Roses. It's believed to actually be a depiction of the symptoms and the ultimate fate of having the plague. Ring a Ring a Roses has the possible meaning of the red rashes that would emerge all over a sufferer's skin, and a tissue obviously would refer to their sneezing and general illness. Under this interpretation, the last line of the nursery rhyme has a dark meaning. They all fall down dead.
Of course, nowadays, when we think of the plague, we automatically think of the 1665 to 1666 plague, and often have the picture in our heads of how this plague specifically affected London. Now, the Great Plague of London, which was during that time, and that's at least is the one I remember being taught in school. In that plague in London, 1665 to 1666, around 70,000 people died. It was famously followed by the Great Fire of London in 1666. Now, this tragic fire actually helped end the plague by killing many, many rats and fleas. Samuel Pepys wrote in his diaries at this time in London, and he documented the Great Fire of London, but he also documented the plague. There are some excellent diary entries that show how the plague spread in London. Pepys actually frequently wrote about the figures of the plague. He was collecting and keeping a record of how many people around him were dying. An example of what he wrote was just how empty the streets of London were. A quote from him is, "Little noise heard day or night, but tolling of bells, till I could walk Lombard Street, but not meet 20 persons from one end to the other."
Well, I hope he was wearing his COVID mask.
It does make you think of COVID, doesn't it?
That's exactly like COVID. Yeah, so many memories of how surreal it was. I lived in Cardiff at the time, which is, a busy capital city, how surreal it was going down, packed streets and they would be completely empty.
400 years ago, and then today, we're still having that same experience.
Exactly, yeah.
I wonder if there's any quotes people wrote in the diaries that kind of follow almost the same style as he did.
We need someone who's from London to come in with a diary of maybe they can find the same street.
That's it. By chance, if anyone listening is walked along Lombard Street in London, you wrote it in your diary, never know.
Side note, on the 3rd of September 1665, Samuel Pepys wrote about how fashion might change, specifically him predicting that wigs will disappear because, quote, "Nobody will dare to buy any hair for fear of the infection that it had been cut off the heads of people dead of the plague."
I quite like that prediction. It is important to think, okay, how's this current time going to affect fashion? I still think that today.
Absolutely.
But let's refocus our attention to the town of Sandwich to see how Rodney the Rat was experiencing the Great Sickness. According to records kept in Sandwich at the time, the plague had occurred in Sandwich during the years of 1564, 1568 to 1570, 1597, 1635, 1643 to 44, 1655 to 58, and 1665 to 1666. During this time, St. Peter's Church had been given to the whole population of the Flemish Protestants, and they had all been placed into St. Peter's Church to discourage the spread of the plague. It has made St. Peter's Church become known as the Strangers' Church. Now, a fact about figures of Sandwich at the time: the recorded deaths in Sandwich due to the plague in 1644 was over 100 deaths. This slowly increased until with 1659 to 1666 there was over 500 deaths recorded just in Sandwich. When people would die, it was St. Peter's that was used as a crypt. So a crypt was a place where bodies were stored when the graveyards were full due to the mass amounts of death. In fact, the last of the plague was recorded in Sandwich in the 17th century. In 1667, the mayor of Sandwich at the time, William Stringer, wrote, and this is a quote, "In this year, God be praised, sickness was clear out of town the last of March."
Unfortunately, a lack of scientific knowledge meant that it was the cats and dogs who got the blame for this great sickness. And with these domesticated pets being killed as an attempt to stop this plague, flea-ridden rats, possibly including Rodney, get to wander around the streets of Sandwich far more carefree, spreading the deadly Black Death to more and more people. The peasants were none the wiser at the time, but over the years, with the advancements in medical science, the rats appear less and less innocent.
Eventually, medical science comes across the theory that we are all familiar with. The Great Sickness became more accurately understood to be a bubonic plague, with the example being known to historians as the Great Plague. According to the Science Museum website, the bubonic plague is defined as a highly infectious disease spread by fleas that bite their host, usually rats and humans. The fleas and the rats introduce bacteria and subsequently the disease in the host's body. Now you may know the Black Death was the plague that occurred prior to the Great Plague. The Black Death occurred in the 1300s in Europe, and this killed almost 1/3 of Europe's population. It was tragic, but there were some lessons that we learned from the Black Death. For example, that was when we started a controlling of movements of people and goods. So this meant that we could stop the spread of disease. In the 1300s, we realized that people close together would cause the infection to spread more, and so we had to contain that. Also, emergence of medical practices that are still used today occurred back then. There was record keeping, isolation of the sick, and restrictions imposed as a means to restrict the spread of infection. Even if the medical science wasn't there in terms of the knowledge and understanding why these practices worked, it was still known that doing these things helped. The first recorded use of quarantine, for example, occurred in Venice in 1127. It comes from the word quarantenaria. Definitely pronounced that wrong, my apologies. Italy used quarantine measures during the 1300s of bubonic plague. However, it wasn't until the Great Plague in the 16th century, and the one we're talking about now, where England first used quarantine.
Scientists discovered that the plague actually came from rats. In 1894, Alexandra Yersin discovered the bacterium that caused the plague, Yersinia pestis, or Y. pestis. Now, in terms of the spread of the plague, fleas from rats transmit Y. pestis to humans. The science is that rats are the hosts and carry the Y. pestis bacterium. Whilst the bacterium is in the rat, this is called the enzootic cycle, meaning low level of disease in a population. During this stage, levels of the Y. pestis is low, so no outbreak. The rat dies, the fleas from the rats transmit the bacterium from the rat to the humans. This is called the epizootic cycle. Now high levels of Y. pestis found in humans, there is now an outbreak. The cause of the plague was not discovered until the bubonic plague occurred within China in 1860, which lasted until 1959. This pandemic killed approximately 10 million people. The rats were to blame for spreading some of this awful disease.
Poor Rodney. Now, to provide a potentially new glistening spanner in the works, interestingly, very recent research today has started to suggest that even the rats were not to blame. Rodney could reclaim his innocence after all. A study released in 2018 in the PNAS journal by Dean et al. States that the Black Death is caused by human parasites, such as lice and human fleas, not the rat fleas. A second study carried out involved two simulations, one with a plague that was caused by human parasites and another simulation with a plague that was caused by rat fleas. The analysis of this was compared to records of 9 actual plagues that took place in European cities. It was discovered that the mortality rates of the human parasite plague simulations matched mortality rates of 7 out of the 9 cities. So there's evidence to suggest the real Black Death was more likely caused by human parasites than fleas from rats. So this is one study that's released a few years ago, and whilst it does go against the popular consensus of what caused the spread of Black Death, it is absolutely fascinating to know that advancements in technology and science are helping researchers discover new things about a piece of history we all thought we already knew lots about.
As far as we know, our rat didn't die of plague. It had a very different end. As the tale goes, on 13th of October 1661 at 11:15 at night, an earthquake struck the small town of Sandwich and the original tower of the St. Peter's Church came crashing down, directly on top of Rodney the rat. The well-kept mummified body was found during some archaeological work on the church garden over 300 years later in the 1970s. It was identified as a black plague rat, and this story and legacy lived on within the Sandwich Guildhall Museum and now through this podcast. Rest in peace, Rodney.
This episode does not end there, though. The story surrounding the legacy of the small mummified rat in our museum is a great and slightly gruesome tale to share with all of our visitors and you. But we are a museum, so although it is fun to share tales like this one, our stories must be factual as well as compelling. So, let's dig a bit deeper here. Firstly, Kat, what details of the story would you question?
So, the story is that Rodney the rat survived the plague and then got crushed by a tower during an earthquake.
Yes.
Well, do we know any more about the earthquake? Is Sandwich particularly prone to earthquakes?
Well, that's definitely one question I came up with. Surviving a whole plague out of all those years and then, whoops, death by church tower. Well, apparently Rodney was a plague rat killed when the tower of St. Peter's Church fell on him during an earthquake in 1661, as she said. But we've already mentioned the years that there were outbreaks in the Plague of Sandwich, and 1661 was not one of them. Plus, as she asked there, Kat, an earthquake? A quick search online immediately had us humming and ahhing to this part of the story, so let's crack this case. The first fact to consider here, what sort of rat is Rodney? Well, Rodney had to be a black rat, because brown rats were not introduced into England until 1740, many years after Rodney's existence. So black rats live for about a year. However, some have been known to live to 3 years, though this is very rare. You should hold on to this fact as we come across our first big discrepancy. And here's the problem, Kat. The last plague around this time with Rodney was reported in 1658, but Rodney died in 1661. Which is 3 years after the plague. Black rats live usually for a year. So how can Rodney, 3 years after the plague, be a plague-carrying rat? What do you think about that, Kat?
Well, just because there wasn't a plague reported at the time doesn't necessarily debunk it. The rat could have carried the plague, maybe?
That's true. We're going to hold on to that. I want to believe in this tale of Rodney. I want him to be true. So we're going to hold on to that. He could have been carrying it. So the last outbreak of the plague was 3 years prior, and whilst rare, the rat could have been the special rat that lived longer than rats usually do. Plus, whilst there are no recorded outbreak, there could have still been plague-carrying fleas around, and thus, potentially, I guess, Rodney could have been carrying the plague at the time of his death. We also don't know how long the outbreaks lasted, or how long it took for there to be no further infections in the town. These facts do present raised eyebrows, however, they do not yet completely debunk it.
So, was there actually an earthquake?
Okay, let me actually get to this now. It's quite rare to have earthquakes in this part of the world. The only records we have of any earthquake or storm was from the book Sandwich and Round About It by W. J. Gordon, in which Gordon states, when on one October night in 1661, the north wind proved too strong for the steeple, and it toppled it over onto the south aisle. And again, this is just simply suggesting strong winds. It doesn't actually suggest an earthquake. It's the exact same time and the same night in which Rodney died. And we do know that earthquakes did occur in the years 1578 and 1692. However, there is no evidence of an earthquake occurring in 1661. So, fortunately, Kat, no, I don't think there was an earthquake.
Was the church tower just in terrible condition?
Well, I'll get to that. Hold your horses, everybody.
Okay.
Because there's one thing I have to include is that there was an earthquake in Dover Street in 1580, which caused damage to buildings in Sandwich. So it's possible that the story has been combined with the story of St. Peter's Church is falling. Now, you mentioned about the conditions of the tower. Well, I've got a quote for you, and have a think about this. At the time, it was recorded that the church tower, had it fell at the time when the people were there, the chiefest of the town and parish had been killed and buried under the rubbish and stones and timber. There were reports at the time in Sandwich that multiple warnings had occurred of a damaged and ruinous structure to the church tower. In fact, 20 years prior to its collapse was when it was first reported that this church tower was not in good condition. So, yes, the church tower was in awful condition. Did it just fall down because of strong winds? That's what we think. If you, listener, happen to know of an exact source that states the existence of an earthquake in 1661, please do contact us and let us know. We couldn't find one, but I'd love to know if there actually was one. Otherwise, for now, we have to debunk this part of the legend and state that no earthquakes occurred immediately prior to the death of Rodney the Rat, just strong winds and a weak church tower that desperately needed some TLC. I want to add just one last fact to the story. Remember the Flemish settlers who were known as the Strangers and given St. Peter's Church to use while they lived in Sandwich?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when they came to the town, restrictions were imposed on them, unlike the other townsfolk. We know the tower did actually fall in 1661, whether a small fairy creature was squashed by the rubble or not. And despite how they were treated initially when arriving in Sandwich, the Flemish settlers kindly rebuilt it. You will see some examples of the Dutch architecture around Sandwich, the most easy detail to spot being a cupola or dome shape at the top of St. Peter's Church tower today, the rebuilt one by the Flemish settlers.
After all this information, after telling the story of Rodney the Rat and then questioning the validity of it, I want to ask, does it matter that this could simply be a story?
This story is based on some specific details in events that did occur. We know there's been some correspondence in the past about this fairy rat. We are not experts on the scientific elements of the story, but we have carried out our very own research to try to understand how all the pieces of this puzzle fit together. And our conclusion is that they don't seem to completely add up. To answer your question, no, of course the truth matters. We are a museum, and it's important that we share accurate history. That being said, whatever the true story of Rodney the Rat is, the artifact and this tale enables us to talk to visitors about the plague, medieval life, and even the Huguenots that I just mentioned, which are all important pieces of Sandwich's history. And I think that answers the question, why is there a rat in the museum?
It's still quite impressive that we have the rat from that long ago, like the mummified body.
Exactly. If you come to the museum, you'll see his whole body is still there. It's really well kept.
No, it's very well preserved.
Oh, what an episode, though. Thank you, everyone. This is our very first episode that we've ever released here as Loaves to Legends. That's pretty awesome. Thank you for joining us here, Kat.
Thank you for having me.
Now, one last point before we say goodbyes. Loaves to Legends will feature a section every episode where we ask you, listeners, a question relating to that week's topic. I'll be asking each guest to come up with a question of the week, and the aim is for you at home to answer, and you can join in discussions on our Discord server. Now, Kat, here's the final important moment for you. Do you have a question of the week for us?
My question of the week is, if you had a mummified rat, what would you name it?
Oh, if I had a mummified rat. Oh, listeners at home, join our Discord server and let us know what you think. Get involved, have conversations. But now I think we should answer this.
Okay.
Okay, a mummified rat. I think it would have to be, I like Rodney because it starts with R. It's alliteration. You need that creativity there. Maybe I would do, is it bad if I go Remy? Am I stealing Ratatouille here? Or
Poor Remy.
Poor Remy. Have I killed Remy from Ratatouille in this? Oh no.
I think you have.
Oh no. Right, Kat, save me. What would your mummified rat be called?
Oh, an alliteration is good. I'm thinking Rupert.
Rupert.
Rupert the rat.
Rupert the mummified rat. Well, they are our answers, listeners. So please tell us yours. I want to know. I want to see if everyone comes up with an R name or whether people don't do the alliteration route. That has been our first episode. Thank you so much, Kat, for joining us. I'm so glad you could be here to not only show and share the tale of Rodney the Rat, but to also explain the history of the music that you recorded.
Oh, thank you very much.
So thank you for joining. I hope you've had a good time here.
I certainly have.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to say goodbye to you now, Kat, before I leave the listeners for just one quick outro. See you, Kat.
Bye, Gia.
I just wanted to give a quick reminder to email us any feedback, comments, or interesting facts that you know or discover in relation to the topics discussed in today's episode. Just email us at loaves2legends@gmail.com or join our Discord server and be a part of our online Loaves to Legends community. The email and Discord link will be in the episode description as well as our website. sandwichguildhallmuseum.co.uk. And don't forget about our question of the week. This week's question is, if you had a mummified rat, what would you name it? We hope you've enjoyed getting to know Rodney the rat. Who knows? Maybe the unofficial mascot will pop up in future episodes. We'll have to see. It's been great getting to share this story about a small piece of our town's history. We really, really hope that you've enjoyed listening. Subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts so that you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. But for now, it's goodbye. This has been Loaves to Legends, the history-based podcast from the Sandwich Guildhall Museum. Thank you for listening, and we'll speak again soon. Loaves to Legends is produced by the Sandwich Guildhall Museum. Millie and Gia are the executive producers. Today's episode was researched and written by Gia and edited by Millie. Gia and Kat were your hosts. Special thanks to Ian Pittaway for the permission to use his translation of the music, and to Kat Batchelor for performing it. Finally, thank you to Beth Stone for the episode artwork.